Welcome back to the deep dive. There is this pervasive myth in leadership circles, and honestly, just in high-performance culture in general,
hmm
that at some point you have to choose. You can either be the general, the one who's competent, strategic, invincible, or you can be the human, messy and vulnerable.
The old Iron Lady versus the damsel dichotomy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the prevailing wisdom is that if you try to be both, you'll fail at both. You'll lose your edge.
Right.
The logic is basically, if I let my guard down, the kingdom burns.
It's a classic zero-sum game mentality, right? We're taught that armor is heavy for a reason, so if you take it off to connect with someone, you're effectively walking onto the battlefield naked.
Right. But today, we are tearing that assumption apart. We are doing a deep dive into a psychological profile that completely reframes that tension. We're looking at the character of Bonnable Princess Bubblegum for the uninitiated, and specifically her relationship dynamic with Marceline.
And I want to be clear right off the bat, this isn't just a ship breakdown or, a fan discussion. The source material we're working with today is a heavy-hitting psychological analysis. It treats her character arc as a really serious case study, a case study in moving from hypervigilance to something called secure connection.
So the mission today is to figure out how someone goes from finding safety in controlling everything to finding safety in in just being. The source calls it a shift from safety through prediction to safety through presence.
And the argument the text makes is, frankly, fascinating. It claims that this shift doesn't make a leader softer. It actually makes them more competent. It's a concept called integration.
I have to say, reading through this, I had a bit of a crisis. There were parts of this analysis where I felt personally called out, especially the stuff about overfunctioning.
You and me both. It reframes competence in a way that's actually kind of uncomfortable. It forces you to ask why you're so good at your job.
Well, let's get into that discomfort. Let's start at the baseline. The source describes Bunnable's default setting, the way she ran her kingdom for centuries, as relying on cognitive control. So, break that down for us. What are we actually looking at here?
So on the surface, cognitive control, it looks like brilliance. It looks like being the smartest person in the room. But the source argues that for Bonnabelle, this isn't just a talent, it's a trauma response. Cognitive control is the mechanism she uses to regulate fear.
So she's not just planning because she likes spreadsheets. She's planning because she's terrified.
Essentially, yes. The text defines this as safety through prediction. I mean, if you think about the world Bonnabelle lives in, it's chaotic, it's post-apocalyptic, there are monsters everywhere. Her logic is, if I can predict every variable, I can prevent every disaster.
It's the ultimate contingency plan.
Yeah.
But the source points out that this is an exhausting way to live. I think the phrase used was a strategy of strict control.
It is exhausting because it requires, omnipresence. You have to be everywhere, watching everything all the time. The analysis points out that this leads to overfunctioning.
That's the term that hit me, overfunctioning. Can we define that clearly? Because I think a lot of listeners might think, well, isn't functioning highly a good thing?
In a vacuum, sure. But in psychology, overfunctioning specifically refers to taking responsibility for things that aren't yours to carry, usually to manage your own anxiety. The source says Bonnabelle feels she must be useful to be safe. Her value is tied entirely to her utility.
So if she isn't fixing the problem, does she even exist?
That's the question. It's this idea of, I am what I produce.
Or I am what I solve. That's grim.
Exactly. And the dangerous part, and the source is really sharp on this, is that it works. That's the trap. She did keep the kingdom safe. She did solve the problems, so the behavior gets reinforced. She builds this massive fortress of competence.
But it's a lonely fortress. The analysis suggests that this creates a dynamic where she is the provider and everyone else is a consumer. There's no peer. There's no equal.
Right, because to have a peer, you have to admit you can't do it alone. And to Bonnabelle's safety through prediction brain, admitting you can't do it alone is just admitting a vulnerability in the system. It's a security breach.
Okay, so that's the baseline. High-functioning, hypervigilant, lonely at the top. But then the variable changes. Enter Marceline. And we get this scene the source focuses on, a moment of intimacy, where Bonnabelle isn't the leader, she's just there. And she gets embarrassed.
This is pivotal. The text highlights a specific moment where she blushes or hides her face. Now, normally we'd read that as, oh, she's shy. Or maybe she's ashamed of having feelings.
That was my first read. I thought, okay, she's a control freak, so losing composure is embarrassing. She feels shame because she's breaking character.
But the analysis explicitly corrects that. It says the embarrassment she feels is not shame in a moral sense. It's not that she thinks she's doing something wrong.
So if it's not shame, what is it? Because it certainly feels like shame when it happens to you.
The source calls it nervous system recalibration.
Recalibration. That sounds technical. Unpack that for me.
Think of it like the bends when you come up from deep water too fast. The source explains that Bonnabelle has spent centuries in a state of high alert survival mode. She is pressurized. When she enters a space with Marceline where that vigilance isn't required, where she is safe, her body just doesn't know what to do with the drop in pressure.
That is such a powerful distinction because I think we often misinterpret that feeling. You finally relax or you let someone help you and you get this cringe feeling in your stomach. And we interpret that signal as stop, unsafe, go back to the armor.
Right. We think it's a warning light. But the source argues it's actually just the machinery shifting gears. It's adaptation in progress. It's this somatic realization that the armor is actually heavy. You don't realize how heavy it is until you start to unbuckle it.
And that unbuckling feels like exposure.
It is exposure, but the text makes this beautiful point. The hesitation she feels isn't a sign of richness. It's just her body asking, is this real? Are we really allowed to stand down?
It's a trust exercise with her own biology.
Precisely.
Right.
And that takes time. The source emphasizes that you can't logic your way out of this. You can't think your nervous system into relaxing. You have to experience it. You have to survive the quiet moments to prove to your body that silence isn't a threat.
Which brings us to the catalyst for this experience.
Yeah.
We need to talk about Marceline. Because the source is very specific that Marceline isn't just a generic love interest here. She's not just supporting Bonnabelle. She is providing a specific psychological framework.
The term the source uses is secure co-regulation.
Okay, let's unpack that because co-regulation gets thrown around a lot on social media these days. What does the text actually mean by it in this context?
It defines it with two really striking phrases: calm without demand and closeness without obligation.
Calm without demand. I stopped reading for a second when I saw that. Because for a high performer like Bonnabelle, isn't every interaction a demand?
Almost all of them. Even positive interactions usually have a price tag. I will praise you if you lead well. I will support you if you fix this mess. It's transactional. Bonnabelle's brain is wired to manage transactions.
She's dealing with if-then statements. If I do X, I get love.
Exactly. But Marceline breaks the algorithm. She offers a calm that doesn't require Bonnabelle to fix anything, solve anything, or be anything other than present. There is no output required.
That must be terrifying for her.
It's baffling for her. The source notes that for someone used to managing every variable, a relationship you don't have to manage. It feels suspicious at first. It feels like a trap. Why are you being nice to me? What do you want?
But once she realizes it's not a trap, what changes?
She learns intimacy without consequence. That's the breakthrough. She realizes she doesn't have to overfunction to remain loved. She can just exist.
And this leads to the next big shift in the analysis. We move from the brain, the predicting, the strategizing, to the body. The restoration of embodiment.
This is the safety through presence part of our equation.
Now, embodiment can sound a little woo-woo, a little abstract. What does it actually mean for a scientist's character to become embodied?
Well, think about where Bonnabelle usually lives. She lives in the future.
The future.
Strategic planning is future living. What will happen in 5 minutes, 5 years? What is the contingency?
Yeah.
She is physically in the room, but her consciousness is projected forward, simulating scenarios. She is a brain in a jar, effectively.
Okay, I see. She's treating the present moment as just data for the future.
Right. But you cannot be intimate in the future. You can only be intimate in the now. The source says that physical closeness with Marceline forces Bonnabelle's processing out of the future contingency mode and into sensation without threat.
Sensation without threat. That's interesting because usually for a prey animal or, a paranoid leader, sensation is a threat, a noise, a touch. It's data to be analyzed for danger.
Exactly. Is that sound an attack? Is that temperature change a chemical leak? But here, she is experiencing touch, warmth, breathing, and none of it is a puzzle to be solved. It's just happening.
It grounds her.
It anchors her. The analysis claims this creates emotional flexibility. When you are rigid with fear, you break easily. When you are grounded in the present, you can bend, you can adapt.
So she stops being a rigid statue of a leader and becomes a living, breathing person. But here is the pushback, and I think this is what every Type A listener is thinking right now.
I can guess what it is.
If I stop living in the future, If I stop obsessing over contingencies, if I take off the armor, do I lose my edge? Do I become soft? Because Bonnabal has a kingdom to run. She can't just sit around feeling embodied all day while the walls burn down.
This is the crux of the entire analysis, and honestly, it's where the source material is most critical. It emphatically rejects the idea that vulnerability equals a loss of capacity.
She doesn't lose her skills.
Not at all. The source uses the concept of integration. It argues that intimacy expands her autonomy rather than eroding it.
Expands autonomy.
How?
Because usually we think of relationships as compromise. I give up some me to be with you.
That's the transactional view again. The source proposes a different model, replenishment.
Replenishment.
Think of her capacity as a battery. Under the old model safety through prediction, she is running on adrenaline and cortisol. She is draining the battery constantly to maintain the shield.
It's not sustainable. That's why she's so high-strung.
Right, but this new dynamic, this secure attachment, acts as a charger. Being held doesn't negate her ability to hold others. The source says it replenishes it. When she steps away from Marceline, she isn't weaker, she is rested.
I like that image. She goes back to the lab, but she's not running on fumes anymore.
And this changes the quality of her leadership. The source describes her becoming internally coherent.
What does internally coherent leadership look like versus her old style?
Well, she's still decisive. She's still brilliant. She's still the boss. But the driver has changed. Before, her actions were driven by the fear of loss. Every decision was a desperate attempt to stop the world from ending.
Which is frantic. Even if she looked calm, internally, it was frantic.
Exactly. But now, with a secure base, she operates from a place of choice. She isn't controlling the kingdom because she's terrified of what happens if she stops. She's leading because she chooses to.
That is a subtle but massive shift. It's the difference between a drowning person grabbing a life raft and a captain steering a ship.
Perfect analogy. The actions might look similar from the outside. She's still giving orders, but the internal energy is completely different. The source calls this a reorganization of how safety is experienced.
A reorganization. So she didn't get a personality transplant. She just got an OS update.
Yes, an OS update, version 2.0. And the patch notes say, control is no longer the only tool. Trust is now available.
That's the key, isn't it? It's not that she throws away her strategy. It's that she's not held hostage by it anymore.
She has options. She can deploy the general when she needs to fight a war, but she can also deploy the partner when she needs to rest. Before, she only had the general. Now she's a whole person.
It really challenges that martyrdom complex we see in leadership. The idea that you have to suffer to be good. The text is basically saying you're actually a worse leader when you're suffering and isolated.
You're certainly a more brittle one. And eventually, brittle things break. The source notes that integration makes her anti-fragile. She can handle chaos better because her internal world isn't chaotic anymore.
So if we zoom out and look at this whole arc, we started with a character trapped in safety through prediction, overfunctioning, exhausted, terrified of the variables.
We watched her hit that moment of recalibration, where the body hesitates to trust the safety, that awkward, necessary stumbling block.
We saw how secure co-regulation, that calm without demand, helped her bridge the gap, that willingness to sit in the stillness without needing to fix it.
And finally, we land on integration. The realization that you don't have to choose between being strong and being held. You can be both. In fact, you need to be held sometimes to stay strong.
It's a hopeful message, especially for those of us who might be gripping the steering wheel a little too tight right now.
I think it's a reminder that the stomach drop feeling, that fear of letting go, isn't always a stop sign. Sometimes it's just the feeling of the armor coming off.
I want to leave the listener with one specific thought from the source material that really stuck with me. It's about that hesitation.
The awkward phase.
Yeah. The source suggests that when you finally let your guard down and you feel that wave of awkwardness or cringe or hesitation, that isn't a sign that you're failing at being a leader. It is literally just your body realizing it is finally allowed to stop working so hard.
It's the body saying, oh, wait, we can put the sword down.
Exactly. So the provocation for you today is this. What would it look like to trust that adaptation instead of fighting it? What happens if, just for a moment, you treat that hesitation not as a weakness, but as a victory lap?
Trust the adaptation. I love that.
Thanks for diving deep with us. Hopefully this helps you integrate a little bit of that safety into your own kingdom today.
See you next time.
Take care.